Hey, this is Steve Haverly. Let's talk a little bit about our marriage today and see how we can really improve our marriage. You know, one of the things that people will talk about and cite in their marriage that is problems with their marriage is, oh, we're just not really compatible. I think I married somebody that we didn't realize in the beginning that we weren't really compatible with one another. So maybe we should just split up and go our separate ways, and then one of these days I'll find someone who is more like me and we have more commonality. Well, I get that. I understand how people will come up with that reason behind why their marriage isn't good. But what I'd like to point out is this, okay? Look at it from Jesus' standpoint or from God's standpoint when he looks at us. When as Christians we talk a lot about we need to be Christ-like, and I want to become more like Jesus, and so in our marriage, I'd like to be more like Jesus. Well, how is that? What does that mean? I want to be more loving, I want to be more forgiving, I want to be more compassionate. Okay, that's all great, but how are we going to be that, and how are we going to learn that with someone who never disappoints us like we do him? We disappoint him all the time, and he brings us back in and forgives us and nurtures us even when we're against him many times. Well, how are we ever going to learn and practice that in our own lives with someone who never tells us no, who never disappoints us, who never turns against us in some way or speaks ill of us? And we all say we want to be like Jesus, but when we try to treat our spouse like Jesus would, we say we're not compatible and we should split up. How would we know what Jesus goes through in the area of forgiveness if we don't have a spouse who never needs forgiveness, or who, you looking at us ourselves, me, myself, and you yourself, if we don't ever need forgiveness and go to our spouse and say, I have done wrong, I'm sorry, would you please forgive me? If we don't ever do that, we don't know what Jesus is going through. And if we want to be like Christ, if we want to be like him and act like him and think like him and love like him, how can we possibly do that with our spouse if they're never disappointing us? So I think many times that God puts us together. I know this is true in my marriage, and I'll bet it's true in yours too, and probably many others you can think of, where God ends up putting two people together that are very dissimilar to one another. They don't have the same temperament. They don't have the same interests. They just are wired and think differently. That's part of a whole giant lesson on the differences in the genders between men and women. We could talk about that forever. But just that there right alone is a great difference in two people. Just the fact that men and women are different in so many ways. And then when you begin to bring in all the other things, the likes and dislikes and the interests and the lack of interest, it can go on and on. But if we didn't have those with our spouse, we would never learn to be like Jesus is. And we would never have that first-hand account. If we don't ever have our spouse to forgive and to love them anyway, and if we can't ever go to them and say, please forgive me, would you love me anyway, we can't really know what Jesus is going through. So think of it that way. From now on, when you're in one of those situations with your husband or your wife, and you're tempted to say, I just don't think we're meant for each other because we have so many things that aren't in common. We just don't have the same interests. Remember that so many times we don't have the things in common with Jesus either. And he loves us, he forgives us, and he brings us back in every time, no matter what. Next time you're going through something with your spouse, just think about that. I know I will. Hey, this is Steve Haverly. Let's go out and see how good our marriage can be today, okay?